So the winter market is closed, and I guess there's a lot we could talk about, but there's one thing that's on everyone's minds right now, and that's Chelsea. Ever since Todd Boehly took over, they have gone completely insane, and it all seems to have peaked yesterday. 121 million euros for Enzo Fernandez, the 6th most expensive transfer of all time, and the highest fee ever paid for a player in the Premier League. That by itself would already have been pretty impressive, but well, they did a lot more than that. Just this season, they've already spent 611 million. 363 of those millions coming during the summer transfer window, which was literally the most expensive transfer window of all time by any club ever. And somehow they've managed to top that now in January, literally spending more money than all of the other top 5 leagues combined. I mean, Spain, Germany, France, and Italy put all of those 4 leagues together and they've spent less money than Chelsea. No wonder the Super League has become a common topic. So yeah, I thought it was probably for the best that we took a look at these transfers. But yeah, the first thing that becomes obvious is a bunch of money being paid for players who aren't exactly big names. I mean, there's clearly a tendency to overpay. Just go on Transfer Market and analyze their market values, and at least 2 of them will immediately stick out to you. First, Wesley Fofana, who was valued at 40 million, just half of what they paid for him, and Marco Corella, who was literally valued at just 28 million at the time of the transfer, meaning they paid more than double. But the most impressive thing in all of this is that unlike in other seasons, they haven't made too many sales at all. I mean, there was Antonio Rudiger, but he went on a free transfer. The same applies to Christensen and Marcos Alonso. And we're pretty much left with one significant transfer, and that's Timo Werner back to Leipzig for just 20 million. Again, if you check transfermarket.com, you'll see it was valued at 35 million at the time, which, yeah, probably not that good of a sale. But yeah, those free transfers are what boggles my mind. Because in part, it was the board's inability to renew these contracts that forced them to have to rebuild so drastically. And I guess the same applies to Tuchel, who for some reason they just couldn't keep around. Not to say that's entirely because of Tuchel leaving, but Chelsea are only 10th place in the league, which certainly doesn't justify the amount of money they've spent. But really, this underperformance shouldn't be that surprising. The last 2 times they spent big, they ended up with Werner, Havertz, Chilwell, Zappacosta, Morata, Drinkwater, and Bakayoko. Clearly, they've been struggling to pick the right players, and maybe this is just the same thing all over again. Because you go back and look at the list again. Aubameyang isn't exactly making headlines, neither is Sterling. Cucurella, Fofana, and Koulibaly have been okay-ish at most. Honestly, this is a really strange situation, especially given that they picked Graham Potter to replace Tuchel. At times I just feel like he doesn't have it in him to motivate the players that were already at the club before him, you know what I mean? And since the board seems completely unable to offload them, it just ended up with an oversized squad that has now 33 players. And, you know, an oversized squad equals a tumultuous and unhappy dressing room most of the time. But yeah, moving on to the January transfer window, which again brings us back to that other point that they are overpaying. Enzo was just valued at 55 million at the time of the transfer, which was literally like yesterday. And going back to the other players, the same applies. Mudrik's transfer fee can go from 70 million up to 100 million, but it was only valued at 40. Madueke was bought for 35, but it was valued at 15. And even Malo Gusto was also bought by 30 when he was valued at 15. And though players like Malo Gusto are slightly different, as I think his name as a sort of promising player has gained enough traction that a 30 million euro fee might be justifiable to a certain degree. But yeah, this is just unbelievable, and I'm not even taking into account Nkunku, who they've already signed for 72 million, though he will only join the following season. And again, this becomes more crazy the moment you realize they haven't made many sales. Even more especially in this transfer window, they've just sold Jorginho. That's it. 11.3 million to their rivals Arsenal, all while his market value is 35 million. They didn't even get half of what he's supposedly worth. You know what I mean? But yeah, you end up with the question of why aren't they selling more? And I don't know what to tell you, honestly. Their squad is up to 33 players at this point, even though the Premier League squad limit is just 25, with only 17 foreign players allowed, and they have to get that list ready today, literally. Even more impressively, in the Champions League, they will only get to register 3 out of these 6 players: Enzo Fernandez, Mikael Mudryk, João Felix, Badiashile, Datro Fofana, and Madueke. It does seem like most likely they will go for the 3 big names, but I don't know. They did pay 35 million for Badiashile, and if they end up picking him over someone else, it's gonna seem like a massive waste of money. To be fair, it's gonna seem like a waste of money regardless. But yeah, in the middle of all of this, there's one single man, and that's Todd Boehly. So, rightfully, everyone's been asking, who the hell is he? And I got an answer for you, pretty much. So, from all the way back in college, apparently he was no genius at all. He was more of a sports guy, ironically, right? But yeah, he was like some kind of wrestling legend at his school. They even named their gym after him. Eventually, he went into business administration, and later on, he came to London so he could study in their School of Economics, and it was most likely there that he fell in love with the city, which probably led him to eventually decide to pick Chelsea over any other club. Ever since those days, he's been working and working. It all started at Citibank, then he launched his own business, and after being the main man in a big deal between a cable network and the Los Angeles Dodgers, a lot of windows were opened for him, and in a matter of years, he had taken over a lot of media-related companies, from The Hollywood Reporter to even the likes of Rolling Stone, Variety, Billboard, and alongside this, he also made sure to start, seemingly almost impulsively though I'm sure it wasn't, buying a bunch of sports teams. He started with the Los Angeles Dodgers, and then he funded a fantasy sports company you might have heard of called DraftKings. Then he bought an esports organization, Cloud9, which you might have also have heard of since, well, you're watching YouTube and all of that. More recently, he even acquired a big stake of the Los Angeles Lakers. And finally, of course, Chelsea, who in reality he had been trying to buy for a while now. This wasn't even his first attempt. And yeah, I guess now knowing how much of a big businessman he is and all of that, it probably helps you understand a bit better how they've managed to avoid financial fair play. Regardless, if you want to get a bit of an insight into their master plan on how to escape financial fair play, it's strangely simple. The loophole they found is just kind of laughable. Pretty much if you go and actually take a look at the contracts of each player they bought, they're all strangely long. I mean, Cucurella on 6 years, Sterling for 5 years, Wesley Fofana 7 years, Badiashile 7.5, Datro Fofana 6 years, Malo Gusto 7.5, Enzo Fernandez and Mikael Mudryk 8.5 years. 8.5. That is not something you hear every day, and the reason is simple. So pretty much the way FFP deals with their whole business is that they take the transfer fee and they spread it or divide it or whatever you want to call it over the duration of the contract. Which means that, for example, if you look at Mikael Mudryk, they take the 88 million pounds that he cost Chelsea, spread them over the 8.5 years, and then it's just about 10 million pounds a year, which to them isn't that much. But obviously, if you haven't heard of this already, you're probably making the same question everyone else always makes. Does that mean that they're gonna be stuck with a player for 8 years? And the answer is yes. It's like extremely high risk, high reward. On one hand, if the player turns out to be great and totally worth the money, it pays off tremendously because other teams can't just wait for the end of the contract, come over and steal him from you. but it could also happen that they just turn out to not be worth the money at all. And then you're stuck with a player that you've already overpaid for in an extremely long contract that forces you to probably pay him some ungodly weekly wage that you just can't get rid of. One other thing that I'd like to point out is the fact that, again, they're only in 10th place, meaning there's a high chance that they could end up not qualifying to the European competitions, which would be insane. Finally, there's one question that I like a lot, and the question is financial fair play useless? And my answer is, at the current moment, pretty much. It's pretty much a game of whack-a-mole, you know what I mean? They make the rules, the clubs find loopholes around them, and it keeps going like that. But one thing is sure, they're adapting, and eventually they could arrive at a point where they're actually able to stop the clubs from acting like this. But what that tells me is that conflict is bound to happen. There is going to be a breaking point, and considering the Super League has been lurking around for so long, this might just be what triggers that whole chain of events. I guess I'll end this video with one sentence. Todd Boehly is either a genius or completely insane. And I guess only time will tell. So yeah, like the video, subscribe, all of that, you know. See you next week. Bye.